Hi, this is Richard Edelman, and you're listening to The Trust Makers.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jackie Cooper. I'm lucky enough to be the Global Chief Brand Officer and Senior Advisor at Edelman. And I'm joined this week by technology reporter Taylor Lorenz to discuss Gen Z and the key to earning trust with this unbelievably savvy and trend-setting generation. Earlier this month, Taylor announced her move to the Washington Post, where she will be a columnist on the feature staff. Most recently, she's held roles at the New York Times and the Atlantic. Taylor is best known for covering internet culture and online behavior. It's a beat she's absolutely created for herself, and she's been covering this for the last decade. She's known for spotting new trends in online behavior and meme culture, often reporting on them before they become mainstream. Taylor is currently working on her first book, Extremely Online, Gen Z, the Rise of Online Creators and the Selling of a New American Dream, which is about the rise of the influencer and online creator industry. Taylor, I'm so delighted to say welcome to the Trust Makers.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's get straight into it. First of all, huge congratulations on your upcoming new role as a columnist with the Washington Post. Are you allowed to tell us a bit about the new gig?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited. The Washington Post has always been sort of on the forefront of really experimenting with digital platforms. I think a lot of people are familiar with their TikTok by now. They've also were early on Twitch and Reddit. And I'm really excited to be at a news organization where I can still keep writing, but also do more multimedia reporting and kind of leverage some of these platforms to tell stories about them.
So obviously everything is brilliant when you progress. And I guess this has come about really because your reporting on Gen Z has really sort of made waves, and you've become essentially a gatekeeper to so much of online culture and trends in this space. How on earth do you go about unearthing these trends and stories? How did you get to be in love with this type of story, and how do you go about revealing them and finding them?
Well, I like to think of myself less as a gatekeeper and more of a conduit. I really hear about stories by talking to people. It's funny because people always say like, oh, how do you do it? Or what is your secret? And it's really just reporting. I do sort of the same thing any good reporter does, which is build sources and talk to people. I have DMs open on every platform, and I go through hundreds of them a day and kind of respond to people. And so it's a lot of people in different communities flagging things. And then I spend a huge amount of time consuming stuff on the internet. I got into all of this back in 2009 when I got really into Tumblr. That was kind of my gateway into everything. And I was spending like 16 hours a day on Tumblr back then. Now I spend kind of every waking moment just digesting a lot of content, talking to lots of people, and kind of trying to pull out insights or learnings or trends from those things.
What I really love about what you do, I started my career as a publicist 1,000 years ago, and there is such a craft to journalism, which I think lots of people have lost understanding or knowing about. And it feels to me that you're making this come to life to maybe a generation that isn't so au fait with the actual craft and skill of being a journalist and that kind of intense research, analysis and watching that goes on. And do you think that some people might fall in love with journalism from seeing this with you attracting Gen Z? Do you think you might help them sort of be reintroduced to what journalism is now?
I hope so. It's my goal to kind of change tech journalism. That's been sort of my thing that I've been beating on for a decade. When I first started out in the early 2010s, trying to write about these things, people really did not consider it technology journalism. Tech journalism was sort of the business reporting of, who's going to succeed so-and-so at Facebook. And I always wanted to cover tech from the user side. I was really inspired by writers like Jenna Wortham, Amanda Hess, Katie Notopoulos. They were writing about technology, but in more like cultural impact type of ways. And so I wanted to cover tech from the user side and cover like how it's reshaping our communication and culture. And people did not consider that tech. I mean, even today, there's tons of men in Silicon Valley that really do not consider that real, quote unquote tech journalism. So I hope that I've changed how people think about technology. And I hope that for writers younger than me, it's sort of opened up the opportunities in sort of how we talk about technology and how we cover it. I just want people to think about these platforms critically and not just care so much about, the leadership switch ups at Google or whatever, which obviously is important. We shouldn't stop covering that, but we should also look at things more broadly and take the good with the bad. I am very much a tech optimist in some ways, and I love technology. And so I hope that comes through as well.
I think it definitely comes through. And I think the point about it not being sort of in a niche anymore, but it being mainstream, culturally powerful, relevant to consumers writ large and audience writ large. And I think one of the most amazing things that you've recently reported on, which I guess you couldn't even make up, it's like a parallel universe experience, is the whole Birds Aren't Real movement. That kind of exemplifies sort of Gen Z and how this generation behaves in some ways. Can you tell us a bit about how you went about discovering something like that, and how I think it's a good example of something that started in a very specific way and then just grew and grew and grew and was quite mystifying, I think, to people beyond that niche initially?
Yeah, I mean, that's another example of a story that I just kind of applied traditional reporting to, where I had seen it bubbling up online for years. I was super aware of the meme. I had seen other journalists try to write about it, and Peter, the founder of the movement, kind of like mess with them and prank them. And so my feeling was like, okay, if I'm going to write about this, I want to write the definitive story. Like I always kind of try to write, like, I mean, not all of my stories I'm trying to make that, but if it's something that's been out there for a while, like I think of it sort of like the Renegade story I did about the creator of the Renegade, which is this viral TikTok dance. In 2020, I found the girl who created the dance. And that's another thing too, where like, other journalists had written about the Renegade and written about dance culture on TikTok, but they hadn't actually done the reporting to find the girl who created it. And that just made the story so much more powerful and really put like a human face to things. In terms of Birds Aren't Real, it was the same thing. Like tons of people have written about the movement, but they hadn't actually cracked Peter, where they hadn't done an on the record interview with him out of character. And so I wanted to do that. And obviously the story took off, I think, because of that. So I think it's not just seeing something online and like writing about it, it's doing the steps of like reporting, of just like gaining someone's trust, investigating things, really getting like the true story behind something.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that Gen Z searches for truth, right? We've just carried out this Gen Z special report that we published in December around the power of Gen Z trust and the future consumer. And within that, we debunked quite a few Gen Z myths. We've got clients or people who are kind of commissioning communications thinking, well, you know what, Gen Z's kind of characterized by being self-absorbed or TikTok loving or influencer obsessed and sort of vanguards of let's cancel culture or all of those things. And actually our data showed that none of that was true, and that this is actually a generation that is wanting to solve humanity's issues, that they're looking for safety, they're looking for value, and they're actually quite sensible in some ways. So what do you think non-Gen Zers most often get wrong about Gen Z, and why do you think those myths exist? And I guess most specifically for this audience, how in business marketing can we make sure that we get this right?
Yeah, having experienced some of this coming of age where there was all this conversation about millennials. And when I first covered this beat for years, people always said, oh, she's just covering millennials. Now it's Gen Z, but I see a lot of similar trends where marketers are very eager to kind of like lump everyone together. I always say, like, when people say, oh, how do you write about Gen Z, or we want to have a Gen Z strategy, who do you think's doing it well? I always just try and explain, like, it's not a generation is not a monolith. So who in Gen Z do you want to reach, right? Like if you just say, for instance, oh, we want to reach parents, right? You don't just want to reach parents, you want to reach a certain type of parent maybe. And with Gen Z, I think that's true too. Like what sort of people within Gen Z do you want to reach? Because the entire range of human experience, can be captured in a generation where there's just so much diversity in terms of background, of culture, of thoughts, of interests, And so I think it's important to narrow it all down a little bit and not think of the whole generation as any kind of a monolith. Of course, there's broad trends probably among certain people of similar age groups, but that doesn't mean they have everything in common.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point's so well made. I think because this generation can be globally connected and there's more about interest and areas that they share that are cross boundaries, cross markets, it's easy to sort of think, oh, they all think the same way, but it's just lateral rather than, in terms of being sort of into the region or the geography. And we definitely see more global connections bound together by interest or passion or action orientated interests that they'll have. We also found that safety seemed to be a leading concern for Gen Zers, with 7 out of 10 say they want safety and security in their life. And we've had Gen Zers work on this business and work on this research. And, these people have been through a lot. They've seen recessions, their parents go through recessions. They've obviously survived and surviving as we emerge out of the decimation brought about by COVID. What do you think about this with Gen Z and safety? Is this something that you've noticed? And if you have, why do you think it's sort of important for them?
Definitely. This is something I think that's really important. I think that when you think about Gen Z or anybody that's kind of young these days, right, they've had to come of age in an incredibly chaotic and unstabling time. For a lot of young people, the 2016 election was just, maybe when they were beginning high school, or it was sort of happening during those formative years. Obviously, it was a crazy, tumultuous political cycle, and then the pandemic, and then you see things like economic instability, record wealth inequality, all of these things, and climate change. So it's just a very unstable time. And so I do think a lot of young people do crave security in a way, or they're just more like aware of the flaws in the system. I'm just thinking, I have a lot of teenage cousins, and I just noticed this a little bit in terms of the way that they approach even careers. I know we can get into this in a little bit, but I do think that they're not really necessarily as bought into the systems as older people, certainly myself. I mean, I'm an elder millennial, probably even Gen X to some people. And I, very much bought into the system of, just save your money and take out student loans and everything will be fine. And just climb the career ladder. And I think a lot of younger people are realizing that that system is actually doesn't work for everyone. And also, technology and other shifts have led to a lot more options in terms of what they can do for themselves. So they do kind of try and make sure that they have their own safety net, and they're a little bit more savvy, I think, about some of those issues in the world.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when you're threatened, you look for safety in a way that you wouldn't if everything was even. And we've seen such unrest in so many areas, economically, politically, socially, environmentally. And so all of those things have shaken them to the core. I mean, they've shaken everybody to the core. And this also has impact on the jobs that they're looking for and the way employers are questioning us. So we have clients who are saying, you know what, we don't think we're doing enough to be attractive to Gen Z, this whole notion of the great resignation that's sparked by COVID. What do you think the implications are for that kind of safety and reassurance of security in the workplace? And what can employers do you think, so that Gen Z feel like that's a place I want to be, and that's a place that recognizes the challenges and the aspirations I have in reality in my life right now?
That's a really good question. I think that employers obviously need to adjust to the changing kind of working habits from the pandemic. I think so many young people have had to do school remotely, they're working remotely, and they want to stay remote. And those people should be able to. At the same time, a lot of young people want the kind of career and mentorship that comes with being in an office and having face-to-face interaction. So I think it's having a sort of a flexible view of working situations and recognizing what your specific employees want. I think there's a lot of people who run companies that feel very rigid, or, one way or the other. It's everyone has to be back in the office, or we're remote only, and that's the future. But I think once again, every Gen Z employee is different, and so I think it's about kind of recognizing and working with those needs.
It's a real pressing need. I mean, we've got statistics that say that there's more than 2 billion Gen Zers globally, that they have an unbelievable $360 billion in spending power. And over the next few years, they're going to make up more than a quarter of the workforce. So we certainly can't kind of ignore them. And we definitely have to respect some of the challenges that they're putting in front of us. And one of the things that came across in the research, and that we know also from our own Gen Zs and our agency, is this notion of trying to find the truth, which I think you have a really interesting role in the way that you report. 70% of Gen Zers always double check claims in social media. You've got this almost investigative way of going around stories and double checking everything over and over, then, deeply investigating yourself. How do you think Gen Zers are playing a role in combating misinformation and fake news? Because we've seen so much of that be an issue over the last few years.
I think this is one of the defining challenges of our time is how to help users navigate this increasingly distributed media environment that we live in, that's dominated by platforms like TikTok and Facebook. I think while younger people are undeniably more media savvy in certain ways, and they are likely to kind of fact check things, they're not always good at fact checking things. So you see people see a claim and want to debunk it, but then sort of fall for another piece of misinformation. I'm just thinking of TikTok, really, where this happens rampantly. So I think we need broad-based media literacy in general. I don't think that you can ever kind of police these platforms enough to remove all of the misinformation on them. But I think it's really helping people understand how to properly fact check information and how to navigate these things and not just believe every single thing you see on your For You page. Because I think there's the level of skepticism that people bring to TikTok, it can be very low. And yeah, I guess it's TikTok and Twitter specifically. But yeah, it's a concern. I mean, even the most savvy young people still struggle to differentiate between an opinion column and a news column, right? So I don't think it's just social media that's the problem. I think that we need to have broad-based digital media literacy initiatives for everyone, young people included.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when everything turns up on your screen, because I was brought up with literally the run of the newspaper, and the placement of pieces in the newspaper kind of helped you understand what was op-ed, what was news, what was features. And now everything's just popping up on a screen. So there's a sort of homogenous experience when you get your news, but obviously then you need to check it multi-platform. We feel that people need to check things 5 to 8 times before they really sort of believe them. But a lot of our respondents on the data that we've had are actually really worried about false information or fake news. And you've obviously got the trust of your sources, but how does that translate to your readership? Because you've got a really strong individual brand as a journalist. You've done an amazing job about that. I think you're more than a writer. You're actually an asset as a brand in yourself, and you've clearly got the trust of your audience. So how do you equate that with the investigation and how you decide to actually put stuff out there? And have you made mistakes? What happens if you do make mistakes? And how does that audience react with you if they find out that things aren't 100% right?
Well, first of all, I've definitely made mistakes. I am a human being like everyone else. I did famously confuse the 2 founders of a very famous venture capital firm once, which people will never let me live down. But, here's the thing. I am, like I said, I make mistakes, but I'm open about them. I correct them immediately. And I talk about why I made that mistake. So I think that's what builds trust. I think what doesn't build trust is kind of when you're misleading or you try and hide things, or when you're not accountable to your audience. I've never made any huge mistakes. I've never had to issue any kind of correction on my reporting, but certainly on, we all have social media mess ups. I think this goes back to kind of what I view journalists' role is. I think it used to be this thing where journalists sat up in this ivory tower and, they would sort of dictate things and information onto the world. And I never want to be like that. I very much just want to be like this person that kind of lives among everyone and gets a lot of feedback from everyone. I've written stories where people are like, hey, I like this, but I think actually you do better to frame it in a certain way, to better maybe like communicate what it's all about, or I don't know. I'm trying to think of examples. I read kind of every single message that comes in. And I spend hours a day responding to my audience. And I think that gives me like a greater authority, and that they're more willing to like give me the benefit of the doubt, like when somebody reads a Taylor Lorenz story, like they kind of know what they're getting a little bit more, and they're not just like gonna see something and kind of be distrustful of it. They're like, oh, I know Taylor, I know how she feels about this, or I know like what she means by this. Maybe am I an internet person, and am I this personality, am I a pundit, or am I a reporter? I'm a journalist, but I think like media companies have always struggled with where to put me, because I'm not like the traditional journalist where I am sitting behind that wall. I'm out there, I'm creating content on all of these platforms that I cover, I'm very engaged, which I think gives me a huge leg up when it comes to reporting. Like I'm living in the same world as the people that I cover, and that's why my stories are so good, I think. But it definitely, I think, at certain legacy media companies can ruffle some feathers, where they're like, why are you responding to people, or why are you, never acknowledge your mistakes. That's the one thing there. Oh, don't, delete your tweet and don't talk about it. I'm like, no, let's talk about it. If I made a mistake, I want to talk about it. I want to explain how I messed up. And I think young people get that,
I think this is brilliantly fitting with how brands need to behave, right? It's like you can't take an old model onto a new world, and we're living in a new world. We're living in a world where everything is multi-platform, it is omni-channel, and you're the epitome of that, starting with the craft as a journalist and then living in a multitude of ways and showing up in a multitude of places, and you're multifaceted. And I think that's a really great kind of parallel for how brands need to turn up to market. We can't live in sectors anymore. We have to turn up where the human beings are turning up to. So that, I think, categorization is not necessarily relevant for the world that we live in right now. So that's, in a way, I would say people are asking you the wrong question. And you've got a really great platform with the book that you're working on now. I should think, given the passion of your following, there's going to be a huge amount of interest in this book. I'm really interested in your thoughts about the creator part versus the influencer part. We have influencers who now want to be called creators. We have various kind of conferences or get-togethers of creators who don't consider themselves influencers, but creators who are influential. How do you feel about all of this? Are you able to share some of your insights here in terms of how this is changing so rapidly, and how brands also can kind of best use, because influencer marketing must be the most used sentence I've heard in the last few months?
Well, let's like debunk some myths here. It's so funny. I wrote about this in my book, so once again, it'll be out next year. But I actually interviewed the team at Next New Networks, which then joined part of YouTube and sort of pioneered this term creator, the way that we think about it now as a social media content creator. And that term, especially when it was first came to be in 2010, or it was early 2010, 2011, because previously YouTubers were called partners. So these tech companies, YouTube specifically, was working with online creators, early YouTubers, and they were calling them partners. That wasn't a great word. And so in 2011, they switched to calling them creators. For a while, the term creator was very synonymous with YouTube. And so when Viners came up, when Instagram stars came to be a thing, they didn't call themselves creators. They were it was this very platform defined term. So you were a YouTube creator, you were a Viner, you were an Instagrammer, you were a Twitch streamer, but nobody was, there wasn't like, there wasn't a really good like sort of agnostic term for people that were multi-platform. It wasn't until Vine shut down in 2016 that you saw a lot of these Viners hop to YouTube suddenly, like the Paul brothers, Lele Pons were becoming huge YouTube stars. They were getting big on Musical.ly, other platforms, and you started to see the emergence of these multi-platform creators. Now, 2016 also, as we all know, into 2017 was also this sort of like boom in sponsored content. So you suddenly saw sponsored content all over. This was right before the FTC cracked down because there was so much attention in the area. So the word influencer took hold in the mid 2010s. One, because it was a term that was platform agnostic. So YouTube still had the term creator was still very synonymous with YouTube, whereas influencer was kind of multi-platform term. And influencer has always been the term that is preferred by the marketing industry. It's a term from the marketing industry. So the term influencer is just a term that was applied to content to creators. Like the word influencer is a term applied to creators, but all creators have always been influencers. Influencers are creators. It is the same thing. It's not that the terminology didn't really flip back until 2020 when you saw tech platforms kind of become more powerful than the influencer marketing people sort of in the zeitgeist of the creator world. So suddenly TikTok, right? TikTok has their creator program. They all took that terminology from YouTube. Instagram is building for creators. So now you see the term creator is kind of become that platform agnostic term. I think also because it doesn't have the baggage and implications that the word influencer has around marketing. Sorry, that's the longest answer ever. I don't know if you care about any of that history. That's like a whole summary of a chapter, but basically it bothers me a lot because people try and make these kind of artificial distinctions between the two. There's really not a distinction between influencer or creator. Influencer is just influencing is sort of a term taken by the marketing industry applied to the term creator.
I think that's super reassuring because that pathway explains, I think there's a nervousness by people who are in senior roles in marketing to get all of this stuff right. They're aware that this is hugely important and can definitely pivot their business to better achieving, optimum profile, optimum sales, optimum engagement. But I think they're kind of apprehensive in some cases about how to engage and how they can be better listeners and actually learn from what's going on in this space.
I think of creators, influencers, whatever you want to call them, as like almost little mini media empires, right? And you can engage with big ones and small ones. I think they're, obviously like this whole concept of micro influencers and nano influencers has become such a thing in recent years. But I think it goes back to, once again, not viewing anything as a monolith, not viewing an influencer strategy like, as a monolithic thing, just the way that you wouldn't have like a Gen Z strategy. Like it's like, who in Gen Z do you want to reach? With influencers, it's the same thing. It's not just like, oh, we need an influencer strategy. Okay, let's just pay the, 10 people we know. It's like, well, who do we want to reach and who resonates in those areas?
Yeah, that's super clear. And I guess what's tomorrow going to look like with this generation? I mean, with all of their ways and all of their challenges and all of their hopes and emerging out of the last few years, do you have hopes or predictions that you can share with the listeners?
Oh my gosh, I just had this whole conversation with my editor. My book editor wants me to add in all these predictions, and I always refuse to do predictions because they're so hard. I mean, if you listen to the crypto people, the future is all crypto. But I don't know. I mean, sure, some of it, but I think that we're just going to continue to see more fragmentation in the media market. I mean, what I cover is sort of this mix of like media reporting, tech reporting, and culture reporting. And I think the way that we consume media is only going to become more and more distributed. And I think like big, powerful brands like the New York Times are obviously still going to be around, but people are going to be getting information from more niche kind of sources, whether that's a TikToker that they like or a newsletter that they follow. Like, I think the whole media ecosystem is going to kind of continue becoming more digital and more fragmented.
It's so fascinating. Taylor, is there anything that you would like to say that we haven't said that you think would be useful?
Well, I love hearing feedback. So I would say, I hear from marketers and people in that world a lot, and I do enjoy chatting with them. So reach out anytime if you're like, oh, listening to this, like, oh, she got this totally wrong. I'd love to hear your take too. But every year people ask me if, oh, we've peaked, if the influencer world or the content creator world has peaked, right? Is this a fad that's going to be over? And I'm like, I have been writing about this for 13 years now. It is only, media is only becoming more and more digital. We're only becoming more and more enmeshed with the digital world. So I don't think we're going to go back to the way things were anytime soon.
I think it's fascinating that this is just becoming more, not less, but just more in different ways. And the key thing for me is to help people understand that and not be intimidated by it, because sometimes we have this sort of paralysis of indecision. And I think it's because everyone has a voice now, so there can be criticism. And I think your point about, well, that's okay, welcome the criticism and learn from it is something that in marketing, that's not a natural trait. And yet you've said this is actually fine because you learn from the feedback and you learn from the criticism and to welcome that, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The worst thing is to kind of not do anything. It's like, one of my mentors told me in media, like, you have to be a shark, you have to keep moving to kind of stay alive. And I think that's very true. Like you have to be trying things, you have to make those missteps because that's how you move forward. And look, I've made some dumb things, I've like posted about avocado toast and got backlash for it or whatever, doing dumb millennial things. I don't know. I think as long as you don't like, I'm trying to like say it in the nicest way, because of course you don't want to be problematic or do something really crazy or toxic, but your audience will let you know. I think brands are so funny because they really are so averse to like negative sentiment. And I get that, but it's like, it's a learning process. You'll kind of get a handle on it. You have to know what your audience doesn't like, almost that's just as useful as what your audience does like. So if you think of the most successful content creators, right, they don't shy away from criticism at all. I think some of them could actually listen a little more to the criticism that they get, but they just keep blazing ahead. And I think that, that's what we all should do, right? Is move forward and learn and grow and evolve. And that's how you stay alive. You don't want to just be sitting there paralyzed by fear of some person's mean tweet about you.
Well, Taylor, I think the ability you have to listen and engage with the amazing amount of content and people and opinions and feedback means that you have this incredible way of filtering all of that and expressing it in a way that's really easy for everybody to understand. So that's probably why you're so successful. Thank you so much. Really, really great. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to The Trust Makers.
Thank you for tuning into The Trust Makers, an Edelman podcast in partnership with Advertising Week, where we speak with leaders and other trust builders across institutions. See you next time.